So now I would like to invite Aiguo to as discussant, and Aiguo is actually Aiguo, when she was studying in SUNY Binghamton, then she had the fortune of coming to know MUTO-san and Manuel Wallerstein and also Giovanni Arrighi. And so Aiguo, she's retired and now, but then she has been the senior fellow of the Institute of World Economics and Politics of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing. And she was also here with us in the South-South Forum in 2018. She has also translated all of Emmanuel Wallerstein's weekly bulletins into Chinese. And I think Emmanuel Wallerstein said that there was only one student who actually completed the task, and that is Aiguo. So now over to you, Aiguo.
Thank you very much for inviting me here, and hi to everybody, especially to MUTO. Good to see you again. This globalization is a vague term, but most people understand it as an increase in intensity of contact between nation states, economic, technological, scientific, cultural, etc. In recent several thousand years of recorded history, globalization definitely was going forward despite temporary setbacks. Suffice it to recall that 500 years ago, Europe did not know about America, and that in the Middle Age, most were produced, the goods produced within the feudal manor, and only salt and spicy were imported. But today, the world export is about 25% of the gross world product, whereas it was only 5 to 10% in the first half of the 19th century. It increased to 10 to 15% during the first globalization, that is before the World War I, and then fell to 5 during the Great Depression and World War II, but increased again to 20 to 25 in the beginning of the 21st century. The same goes for the movement of capital, technology, people's ideas, etc. I have two charts, maybe I can show you. One is the value of exported goods as the share of GDP. Of course, this is very clear, showing, you know, the little bit the trend of this thing. And another is the law on the stock of foreign direct investment as percentage of global GDP. You can see, you know, the increase. So the temporary, I feel that temporary setback today is likely due to pandemic and other changes, but the trend towards greater globalization very likely to continue. Why is that? I think that the major driving force of this so-called globalization is the capital expansion. And the capital expansion itself is driven by profit seeking. This is the nature of capital. And this nature will not change. You know, it goes to everywhere to seek for more profit. That's no doubt about it. You know, what other purpose? The thing, if you think, you know, this kind of trend is going to end, I think there has to be at least two conditions. One is that the capital expansion has no more profit available for them. And the other one is that they are capable of stopping it. Those are two conditions. I think we can think about it. It's virtually no. I will not say it's impossible, but well, I just leave it there. Another condition is in the places where the capital expansion go into there, they also have no benefit to gain, any benefit, okay? And also they would have to have the power or the strength to stop it. So I think these two conditions, if they are combined, it may end the globalization that we understand today. But in the current framework, I feel it's pretty much unlikely. But the problem remains that how we are going to change that. If we feel that this type of globalization is not benefiting the majority of people or the humanity as a whole. So like, very popular talk will say, the countries need to ensure that globalization will have a human face. That is, will be inclusive and will leave no one behind. So inequality within countries and between countries can result in a social turmoil and outburst of nationalism, ethno-populism that will undermine globalization. Like I just mentioned, it looks, in the current balance of power, it looks very unlikely. This is what I think about globalization, to put in a very simple way. And I want to say a few words about identity politics. Of course, there are a lot of work, analyzing these issues. We are facing, of course, the inequality among, all this, the race and genders, religions, ethnic groups, and this, that, those kind of inequality definitely need to be dealt with. And, people's movement actually has done a lot of work on that. We should fight for this equality among all this, right? But at the same time, I think, it has both negative, a positive and also some negative effect. But in one word is that the left has to find a way to promote solidarity based not foremost on identity, but on class interest. So in one word, it's workers of the world unite. I think it's just we cannot lose the sight on a bigger picture. Okay, I'll stop here.
Thank you, Aiguo. Yes. So now I would like to invite Dimitris Konstantakopoulos from Greece. He's I think the main person promoting the Delphi initiative. He's journalist and writer and specializes on international policy and geopolitics. He's author of books on Greece-Soviet relations, the Cyprus problem, US policy in Europe and the Mediterranean, the relation between the left and nation in the context of an empire of globalization. From 1989 to 1999, he worked as a correspondent in Moscow at the office of the Greek PM Andres Papadou. And he has been engaged in various political activities as the secretary of the Movement of Independent Citizens, SPICTA, founded by Mikis Theodorakis. So, Dimitris.
us, the question you have put on the center of our discussion today about the end of globalization, COVID-19 does not seem to have finished globalization, but of course it gives us an idea of what can happen, not with the end of the globalization only, but with the end of civilization as we know, if we go on initially indifferent to the very serious the existence of humanity is and technologies after 1945 which are able of leading to the disaster of human race and of all superior forms of life on earth. We hope that this will not happen, so I will concentrate on the more classical, how to say, threats which are coming from the capitalist crisis, and which we know from the previous last crisis of such depth, the 1863 and 1929, which were directly responsible for the end of the first globalization of the 19th century, for the two world wars, for the Russian and the Chinese revolutions, and for the rise of Nazism in Germany. So there is no doubt that since 2008 we are in the environment of such a deep, as profound crisis as those previous ones. Now, before discussing the feature of the globalization, we need to be more precise to definitions. For me, we have to define globalization as the attempt to impose the capitalist relations of production and of distribution and the corresponding cultural superstructure to all the planet, but also to all manifestations of human life. This is an attempt, of course, it has not been completed, and because international capital is trying to generalize this system in all planet and in all spheres of human activities, it has to attack the notions of the nation, it has to attack any traditional ideology, it has to attack any even traditional religions, because all of this is, and to make the states and political and intellectual life an appendix of absolutely controlled by. This is normal because all those identities and all those institutions are an obstacle to the complete domination of capitalism. They are extra economic, as they say, survivals, which have to be destroyed in order to make place for the rise of the Homo economicus, which will be defined only by economic needs, and it will be the anthropological subject of a new totalitarian society. The problem is that this project has encountered serious obstacles. It has encountered serious obstacles because it is getting to the popularization of the Western poorest and middle classes. And so we have strong protest movements inside the West itself, inside the first world. And it has mainly failed because, first of all, of China. China has not succumbed to the, has not been integrated into financial globalization. It has remained a relatively autonomous subject, and a quite big subject inside the globalized world. So it is negating the main goal of the of the architects of globalization. I wanted to say at this point that globalization is not only a system of phenomena and relations, it is an empire. It is a system of power, a system of hierarchy, in the top of which there is an aristocracy of finance, an empire of financial capital, which is becoming now, very after the demise of the Soviet Union, I believe an autonomous strategic subject, and is ruling the world in a kind of strange condominium with the American empire, with the American deep state. And they believed that the entering of Western capital inside China would undermine the Chinese regime, and it would make it an instrument also of the empire of finance and of the Western empire in general, something which did not happen up to now. And that is the colossal failure, one colossal failure of the project of the globalization, of the imperial globalization, to be more precise. So it is normal that they are facing a challenge, and to answer this challenge, we see that there are different views and opinions developed inside the Western leadership. Because from the very beginning, we have to say, inside the leaders of the West, there were two factions. The neoliberal globalizers, with the ideas of Fukuyama, of Soros, of the Washington Consensus, who believed that economic means were more or less sufficient to impose their will on the world. And on the other hand, we have the neocons, the nationalists, those who believe that after all, the continuation of the Western and Israeli domination on the world can happen only by means of violence, of using military threats, wars, and they are directly responsible for all the wars in the Middle East. So this is a civil war inside the empire. They are not, they both want to achieve the goals of, both factions want to achieve the goals of globalization, of generalizing capitalist of production in the world. But the second faction is much more pessimistic about the possibility of achieving this by economic means. And they introduce more and more military means, like we have in the Middle East, beginning from the Middle East, but the wars in the Middle East are not only local wars. Their significance is that they are somehow an exercise of imperial power destined also to China, to Russia, and to some extent to Europe, in spite of the fact that Western Europe is an ally of the United States and is controlled by the empire of finance. But after the Middle East, it is clear that China is coming. And the essence of the Trump, so to say, phenomenon is the effort to use the dissatisfaction produced by globalization itself, by capitalism itself inside Western societies, in order to promote a nationalist war agenda. The program of this faction is the generalized war against Islam, war against the East, war against China, war against the popular classes in the West itself, war against climate and civilization. Trump is the first experiment, and somehow there are some analogies with what we have in the before the Second World War in Germany with Hitler. But of course, this is an analogy. We must not take it 100% seriously. But the main dynamics are the same. By the way, I want to make a at this point, I want to say something which I believe it is very important about nationalism. We should not get all nationalisms in the same basket. It is not the same thing, the nationalism of the nations which are resisting imperialism, even if those nations are quite big, like Russia, of the imperialism. We must not confuse the nationalism of Germans, Nazis, with the nationalism of Greeks and Serbs who resisted Nazism. Because the left, if it wants to have a feature in every country, it has to make policy in national terms. Otherwise, it cannot exist, because we are what we are as human beings. This is not the subject that I don't want to speak a lot. So it is important to try to develop an anti-imperialist national platform and to give a way out for each nation, even in nations there it is more difficult, which are imperialist, like the American nation. So I believe, for instance, that in Russia or in China, the role of the Russian or the China, which is in much, to a certain extent, it is the survivor of the Soviet state, by the way. So the Russian state and the Chinese state, they play also, to a degree, to an extent, such a role of defense to world imperialism. And we cannot, we should not, I believe, treat them in the same way we are treating Western imperialist states. Now, I understand that I have somehow to finalize all that. What I want to say is that the main, I believe, I will tell only some points. I will cut the things I wanted to tell you. The most important thing now, because there is a kind of world war in slow motion. We see this in the generalized sanctions. We see this in the continuous threat of a new intervention in Iran, a new great war in the Middle East, which will be also an exercise against Russian influence there and against Chinese projects, because you cannot have one road, one belt, if all the Middle East is becoming a ruin camp from Libya we will have the effort to put India against China and against Pakistan in the Islamic world. So we are in a very acute, so to say, point in international relations. And I believe we should be practical. We should stop this kind we must struggle to stop this kind of which would, if there were not nuclear wars, it would be already an open war between United States, Russia, and China. And but we must stop those interventions. We must stop. We must mobilize against all sanctions, against all countries, I believe the most important in this struggle is to keep the strategic alliance, if there is a strategic alliance, I hope it will be a strategic alliance, between Russia, China, and the forces around the world which are against the imperialist system, inside the West and in the South. This is the most important, I believe, factor, because if there is a split between Russia and China, then between Russia, China, and the forces inside the West and inside the South, which are struggling against imperialism, then this is a recipe for defeat and disaster. But this is about resistance. In order to be able to win and to make the economy of a probably catastrophic crisis, we need to make more things, and I believe we are very late. We're very late compared to the demands of the situation. The one idea is multipolarism, which means also to leave the system of dollar practically. In the long run, I don't believe there is any solution to those problems if we cannot develop a new vision for the 21st century, a vision which will try, in which could find a place people from the East, from the West, and from the South, because you cannot exclude any part of the world if you want to have a success. It is nuclear weapons of Russia and China are probably able, so to say, to deter America, but they are not this is a necessary condition. It is not a sufficient condition. If we don't build a new civilization, trying to confront the problems the so-called socialism of the 20th century were not able to solve. The ecological dimension, I'm finishing, to put the minimum social needs for the West, our civilization, and probably our human race will be ended. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dimitris. I would recommend you to also, I would recommend all the panelists here and the participants to subscribe to the Delphi initiative, where you will be getting a very different perspective from the mainstreams. Now, I would like to invite Professor Teresa TADEM, Tessa TADEM, to discuss. So Professor TADEM is from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. She is president of the Philippine Political Science Association, vice chair of the executive committee of the Philippine Social Science Council, chair of the Department of Political Science between 2000 and 2004, and also director of the Third World Studies Center and editor of Kasarinan, Philippine Journal of Third World Studies of the University of the Philippines. And so now over to you, Tessa.
Thank you for inviting me here. So I'd like to start first with my comments on the presentation of Alexander BUZGALIN, but I see overlaps also with the presentations of MUTO, Melani, and Galip. I think the first aspect which Alexander raised was the globalization, and it seems to be, he puts a distinction between state and corporations. He says it's globalizations of corporatism and not nations. But maybe I'd like to also clarify, just to be clarified, that I think they're also, the state basically supports corporations, corporates. I don't see them as distinct. And maybe just to put some faces in it, Alexander mentioned about the nomenclatura, about the bureaucracy and support for globalization. In the Philippines, it's not so much, as well as I can see in other developing regions, it's not so much the bureaucracy, but political families, political dynasties, political elites, rather than the bureaucracy, which are benefiting from all of this. So I don't see them as separate, the corporations and the nations. I also like that Alexander brought up the aspect of the cultural aspect of globalization. And he mentioned about the dominance of Hollywood movies. And just last year, a Korean film won the best film in Oscars, Parasite. The theme was on inequality. So I was thinking, is this the alternative to Hollywood movies? But it's mainstreamed into Hollywood movies. So something to think about. At the same time, we also know countries like Korea, maybe India, where 80% of the domestic market watches Korean films, watches their own films. So I don't know, is this the alternative? Or is this the alternative? Is it in touch with the alternative which Melani is bringing to us, where you have culture from the ground? So this is one thing I'd like to look into. Now, the other aspect that Alexander brings out, and I think it's also a theme of the other presenters, is the issue of inequality. And he points out basically the inequality of the internationalization of technology. And I just see it very clearly during this pandemic. Everyone shifting to online, but students, even faculty, we do not have access all to online. And we are dreading the beginning of the semester where we'll have a lot of fallout, especially from the lower classes, that will deprive them of education. And And also, unfortunately, even with this technology, they may go from grade 1 to grade 2 to grade 3, but the quality will not be the same. So I think this inequality is very, very important in this aspect. Now, Alexander also brings out the issue of old neoliberal model, which is the free trade, and the new neoliberal model, which is consumerism and the financial sector. And I see this being jeopardized in the era of the pandemic, particularly for the Philippines. And I think it was mentioned also by Melani, I'm not so sure, that our economy has been propped up by overseas Filipino workers, 22 billion US dollars a month. And that's all gone because they've all been sent home, or they've all been, they've all been sent home. So I think this is very important to look into. Is this, we basically do not want our economy to be propped up by OFWs, because it makes the economy very vulnerable. Same time, it has been the main growth. The Philippines had 7% economic growth since 1992 because of OFW remittances. It's now gone. So I don't know the kind of political, I say not only economic crisis, I say political crisis, because leaderships have not been generally questioned here, because the Philippines can be in chaos politically, but economically it's stable. Because it's propped up. So it doesn't matter, the politics does not affect the economic growth of the country. So I don't know how this pandemic is going to affect it. Secondly, you have the service sector. I think our call centers, the business processing zones, are still okay, but the tourism is bad. I mean, we don't have as much tourists as in Thailand, Malaysia, and others, but it has been the main source of income in the provinces. OFW remittances and the tourism sector. And it's dead. They're dead. So I don't know what the political implication of this will be. And so this is the issue of very vulnerable. Okay. And I think I'd like the point that Alexander brought, that you just don't give money to the poor, house, education, but then, so I think what is very important is to show an alternative model that is being disseminated from below. Now, when I go to Galip's presentation, he points out to the new normal. Oh yeah, okay, this is a very important. Is the pandemic, before the pandemic, neoliberalism gave rise to left-wing populism and right-wing populism. You have Trump, Bolsonaro in Brazil, and then you have left-wing populism in Europe. Here we have Rodrigo Duterte and his war on drugs. So how is the pandemic now affecting this? Is the Trump right-wing populism being adversely affected by the pandemic because he cannot deliver? Because he was also delivering an anti-neoliberal tirade. At the same time, if you have countries like the Philippines, where you have a government that's veering towards the more authoritarian. We just had anti-terrorism law implemented at the height of the pandemic. So that is my question. Is the pandemic bolstering right-wing populism furthermore, or leading to its decline or vulnerability? And I see the different trends, which I think is something we should look at. Okay. And so, okay. And again, the pandemic and the financial market. 6% of the world's elite have become richer because of the pandemic. You have Jeff Bezos in Amazon, Lazada, the Singapore version here. So people are getting richer because of this. At the same time, people are getting poorer, losing their jobs, and even dying. So you have the heightening of inequality. And it's interesting that the Philippine banks have come out with these retail bonds. It's like you buy bonds for a higher interest rate. It was all sold out. So you have a percentage which has a lot of cash. A small percentage has a lot of cash not affected by this. Kinchi, I think I'm up with my 8 minutes because I timed myself. Okay, so sorry. I think I'll just stop there because of time. Okay, thank you.
Tessa, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So now I would like to invite Weiran Fernando from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences to be discussant. Weiran is assistant professor of the Institute for Latin American Studies in the CAS, and he did his PhD at the Institute for Comparative Literature and Culture at Peking University, and his supervisor was Professor Dai Jinghua. In terms of translation, he is the Chinese translator of Garcia Marquez's works and Walter Mitnolo's works. And in terms of teaching, he taught at the University of Los Andes in Merida, Venezuela in 2007, and in Gutenberg University in Mainz, Germany in 2008. And now I would like to invite Fernando to give your views.
Good afternoon to everyone. And firstly, I want to appreciate for all the speakers and discussants from our panel, and the special thanks for the organizing and invitation of Professor Genchi and Global University, and Weiran, a Chinese scholar studying Latin American culture and thinking. And my main research approach is cultural studies. So today in the two panels share the same title, The End of Globalization. I think we all agree to a certain point, a kind of globalization fantasized by a few elite of global north is coming to face a massive challenge, and the market-driven globalization is undergoing a process decoupling, a word mentioned by Professor Huang Ping this morning, and the crisis Galip just argued a few minutes ago, but also bring profit to global capitalism, just as Teresa just argued. However, a new public and shared-based globalization promoted by the majority had just begun. The breakout of the pandemic amplifies the vulnerability of the global one. I use the term from Musha Koji, he mentioned this morning, but also the pandemic provides an opportunity for a new order to re-establish a kind of link, global bazaar, another term mentioned this morning, and multiple globalization, just like Victor Hugo called it Samyamin this morning, or a potential global solidarity, which MUTO sensei just mentioned, or other names, depending on different perspective. I enjoy all the speeches, interventions today from the two panels, because in Chinese metropolis, as in many of the world centers, most economists and international relation experts are concerned and concerning with the first globalization. Their researches were used to support the illusion that everyone on earth is going globalized, prospect that is seen by some as a threat and by others as a promise. For a long time, the academy has seen that most economists focus on develop and rapid growth, and only few scholars, such as Samir Amin, have focused on inequality or even development, or really delved into the so-called stagnation or backwardness of the global south. But in reality, we all know such places that have been described as barren or backward, actually full of dynamic and hope. In the second half of the 20th century, long before the difference of internal structure of non-European society have been really understood and studies, the expert of think tank from developed countries had put forward a set of development ideas and modernization programs using the words of Gustavo Esteva. The concept of development and policy brought about by decolonialization is more like a threat, quote of his words, the light of development dazzling and shocked so-called less development people. Actually, in Latin America, from this suppression of the present uprising of Cardunos in Brazil in the 1890s to the Bolivian coup d'etat in 2019, those who refused to follow the unequal global order and search for local attempts were always seen regarded conservative, ignorant, or anti-international market in the eyes of the international and domestic elites. But today, I think the question may pose in such way, that is, in which way or in what kind of framework could we describe and frame those meaningful difference of local experience? Our vocabulary or terminology is not such rich in this dimension. For example, in the Marxist genealogy, we only have several concepts such as a static mode of production to describe the general economy form of non-European society. In the preface to the critiques of political economy published in 1859, Marx proposed that in general, in ancient, the feudal and the modern bourgeoisie production mode can be regarded as several steps of evaluation of social economy forms. Under Marx's framework, Asian society refers to a type of society in which its private ownership of land is underdeveloped, which states relies on a large number of self-sufficient communities' tribute system to obtain surplus value, thereby maintaining their own long stable structure. As Perry Anderson points out, Marx, the Asiatic mode of production follows Western intellectual tradition and is difficult to shake off its inherent weakness. It is essentially a remnant of a general description of the non-European developed paths, and therefore inevitability makes the different features found in different social forms in a vague archetype. However, this kind of diversity of development implies in this concept the Asiatic mode of production is the most meaningful feature of this in this historical context of Marxism. From this point of view, the Mexican anthropologist Roger Bartra understood the Asiatic mode of production as theoretical framework could to explain the social economic heterogeneity prevailing in the third world. At the same time, as Samir Amin published his important book, The Unequal Development, in 1972, Bartra, in his book, Marxism and its Ancient Society, detailed his analysis of the economy relation between the Aztec Empire and the village community, in which he believed that the two were in fact organized in the accordance with a similar mode of Asiatic mode of production. In the pre-Columbian area, the Aztec system had based a communal land system administered by the central states. That's why during the colonial era, the Spanish crown overlaid the new European system on this original system of tribute, which explain why the original public land system remained until after the War of Independence of Mexico. Bartra argued that even after the Mexican Revolution beginning of 20th century, the bourgeoisie have reached a new agreement with the peasant, re-attended a unique form of poverty, that is the Mexican indigenous land system, el ejido, in addition to the global capitalism exploration structure. In Bartra's view, it is also the original sin of the fragile of the Mexican national bourgeoisie, which had to unite with the poor peasant to secure a Germany after the Mexico Revolution. This contemporary union has cost the national bourgeoisie dearly for dealing with radical populism forever, even today, but at the same time, reminding great political stability, a feature that leaves the Mexican system with the character of eternal transition. It can be said that after eliminating the environmental deterministic factors. Bartra replace and reopen one of the Marxist concepts, just like Asiatic mode of production, making it a cognitive divide to think about its special heterogeneity of this marginal region of the capital system. This kind of discussion of Asiatic mode of production is just one example which I would like to introduce, and it can be argued that we need to translate more common and shared concept and find common theoretical expressions which are from Marxism or from the common experience of decolonialization, and then construct a set of epistemologies of thoughts advocated by the Portuguese scholar and thinker Bonaventura de Sousa Santos. That's why Professor Teng Wei from South China Normal University and I both are students of Professor Dai Jinghua and Professor Ding Qi, who work hard to work out a series of translation called Latin America Humanistic and Social Thinking Translate Series, with help of Chinese Hispanistas, Spanish and Portuguese economic community, because we look forward to building a link for Latin America critical thinking and Chinese contemporary thinking, so that we can examine histories and explore an alternative future, and let Asian and Latin America experience open to each other, whom are equally seeking the different kind of localizations in order to forge solidarity, which was also requires the help from all participants from South-South Forum who are interested in this idea. Last point, I would like to quote Dusk, a French scholar who wrote in his book, Democracy in the Field. He's saying that the idea of democracy and freedom evolved not in the first place from factories, nor from enlightenment, or from international commerce, cities, cosmopolitanism, but from countryside, from farming. Because the interaction between the peasant and land promotes a democratic way of life. Because of this interaction between peasant and life, give them ability to organize themselves in different area in the horizontal time, and invent the art of association, the arts of association. Also, Gustavo Esteva also pointed out in his article that since the 1980s, many farmers, urban peripheral groups, and non-professional intellectuals have tried to shake off the dominant developist institution that have infiltrated the global south. And the social transformation they have driven can be called a revolution of commons. I think the campum, which Melani just argued and mentioned, bring is to the table, could be regarded as a part of this revolution of the commons. Therefore, if the native characters of Mexican just developed from this Asiatic mode of production, which I mentioned above, from the Bartra, is still a vertical relations between the people and the government. Then the horizontal relations between the individuals and the groups, which have a certain equal status, similar to the revolution of commons, is worth our consideration today. Such thinking and action will help to advocate the emergency of new globalization, of sharing and commonwealth. That is my comments, and many thanks for your attention and help of interpreters. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Wei Ran. So many of the names that you mentioned, like Walter Mignolo or Bonaventura de Sousa Santos and Gustavo Esteva, they will all be coming to this forum. So then we can also have a lot of interactions with them. So
sure, thank you.
And now I would like to invite Ernesto Revello Sanchez. Ernesto is independent researcher from Venezuela, and he's now residing in Spain. He's an economist specializing on energy economics, energy public policies analysis, international oil markets, and researches related to global energy issues and integration process in South America. So he was also a member of the, well, he is still a member of the emerging 7 countries comparison of the emerging 7 countries that we have started with back in 2011. And actually, I'm glad to report that the Chinese version of that E7 report will be published later this year. So, and Ernesto has been the main writer for the chapter on Venezuela. So now over to you, Ernesto.
Thank you, Kinchi. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Well, first of all, I would like to say hello to Jade, to Erebus, to Lai Song, that we have met before, you know, in 2011. You know, great memories I have from that trip. Thank you very much for that invitation, and once again for inviting me to participate in this 7th forum. And you know, by hearing all the speakers, I just want to highlight 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main topics, right? And of course, I want to give you like my perspective of a Latin American that is living right now in Europe, no? And especially you know, living this pandemic here in Madrid, which was one of the biggest centers of you know, one of the main cities in the world that specifically suffered a lot, you know, from this pandemic, right? And I have been reading and listening to several medias and other scholars here in Europe. I must say that there's a discussion right now that is they're talking about the relocation of factories, specifically for sovereignty and for sovereign security reasons. And specifically, for example, everything that is related with the health issues, right? For example, the manufacturing of, let's say, masks or pharmaceuticals, etc. So they're talking about the trying to relocate these factories and supply chain from Asia and bringing back to Europe again, right? Because for them, of course, I mean, with this huge pandemic, and they are considering this as a sovereignty security reason to bring back those factories back to Europe. I don't know if that could be possible in the short term, because even though that we know that the capital is always seeking profits, and of course, I mean, it's going to be more expensive to produce those kind of stuff here in Europe. But I think the relocation of factories is going to be at the very core center of the discussions here in Europe in the short term. Also, of course, after all this situation with the COVID-19 and what I are experiencing right now, it's like there's going to be like a huge deterioration of the labor market, right? The flexibilization and precarization of the labor market from now on is going to be huge, and this is something that we're living right now. We're living that situation right now in Europe, and I think it's worldwide. And of course, it's going to be a situation that is going to be living with us in the near term. Also, another issue, an important issue that I sent a compilation that I sent to many of you already, is about the fiscal dumping and fiscal evasion and avoidance. It's something that is is very critical right now due to the amount of money that the government have been spending and putting into the system. And the question is, who's gonna pay for that amount of money that is being printed out or whatever. So the main discussion here in Europe is that they're gonna discuss, even though that we know that the many of European countries are even tax havens, but they're discussing on how can they change that tax evasion and fiscal avoidance in order to, you know, have more income to trying to keep the economy afloat. So I think that is a discussion that is gonna, of course, that discussion has been a while, and have been there for a while in the world economy. From I guess from 20 years ago, many institutions and NGOs are talking about that. But nowadays, I think it's a very critical item that we should keep an eye on, because specifically because I think we within our countries, within our institution, or within the universities, we can foster that discussion about how can we reduce and to the minimum that's fiscal evasion and avoidance. Another critical element that I've been thinking about is the deterioration of the multilateral institutions. As we have seen, U.S. is the main supporter in terms of money, in terms of the amount of money that they give to support these multilateral institutions. Trump nowadays is giving back that support, and I think what we're going to see in the near future is a deterioration of those multilaterals. Let's say HWO or WTO, UNESCO, for example. They are gonna, of course, from now on, they're gonna be working with less and less budget. And my main question is, what China is gonna do about it? Is China gonna take over that budget gap that the U.S. is living out? So that's a good question to answer. And finally, due to the financial crisis and due to the economic crisis worldwide, I think that we're gonna live a massive merger and acquisition process worldwide, which would lead to an increase in capital concentration in the years to come. So we were discussing about the capital concentration worldwide from a long time ago, but I think that's gonna be even that process is going to increase over time, and of course we're gonna experience a lot of more oligopolies, more monopoly, and in our daily life, right? So that merger and acquisition process is gonna be very fast, and I think we're gonna experience a capital concentration increase in the near term. So I think that's just to finalize. Thank you very much for the invitation. Those are my thoughts about the future of globalization. And well, you have my contacts. I'm open to discuss all these issues whenever you want. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ernesto, and also thank you very much to all the 9 panelists. Well, you can see the way we are structuring the forum is that we want it to be a real forum in which we are not only reading out our papers, so we try to present our points, and we invite interactions and debates. So it is more or less a kind of a roundtable, and so I'm very glad that we have been touching on different issues. So before I invite the 4 speakers to come back to a last round of intervention, are there any questions or comments from the floor? but then please try to keep your comment or question to 2 minutes. There's a question to you, Alexander. It's from Patrick Bond. And he says, thank you so much for the fascinating inputs. And his question to you is about Russia's hosting of the BRICS. Is that going to make any change given the India-China conflicts? So that's a question from Patrick Bond.
Okay.
Okay.
So, shall I start or we wait?
Yes, please.
Okay. So first of all, thank you again for everybody who participated in this forum, because I received a lot of very interesting, not simply information, but knowledge and impulse for future development of our common research, of our common education, I can say, because every forum is education of professors. Not only professors as educators, but we are students of the people who are speakers. I'll start from a question of Patrick and then to different topics. Yes, Russia has very big potential to participate in such negotiations, but there is difference between potential and real activity and real role. Potential is still big because we have long historical traditions, and in past Soviet Union very often played big role, especially when we had conflicts between countries of the periphery or semi-periphery. Now, of course, Russia is not Soviet Union more, and the key question is not simply scale and the potential of Russia, but social economic system and policy of Russia, which is a mixture of late feudalism with modern neoliberal capitalism. And this didn't create good chances for real, how to say, internationalist role, because now every country, every state, and especially every capital of every country is trying to receive benefits from any political activity, any geopolitical initiative. And if Russia wants to have benefits for Russia from participation in these conflicts, it will be useless or maybe even negative influence. But if it is a real idea to intensify, to develop cooperation between such countries as China, India, Russia, and not only, who can propose alternative economic, social, political, ideological, cultural alternative to neoliberal global domination of the North, this is another matter. But unfortunately, we do not have such platform. And simply a geopolitical union, and this is partly dialogue and discussion with Dimitris. We are very good and old friends, so greetings to Dimitris, KONSTANTAKOPOULOS from Greece. In this case, I also have big hopes for my country. I'm patriot in very positive sense. I like my country, my culture, and so on. But unfortunately, the ruling forces of Russia, and this is not simply president, this is first of all unity of bureaucrats and oligarchs. They are together trying to, first of all, realize benefits of Russia. When we have common platform for opposition to transnational capital, yes, we can do this. But the problem is that Russia and Brazil, Russia and China, India and China, sometimes we are competitors for the benefits in the world markets. And when we are competitors, we will fight each other, not fight together against US domination. To fight against domination of transnational corporations of the West, or North, let's better say North. In order to do this, we must have at least reformistic, but social democratic alternative to neoliberal or neo-conservative liberal capitalism. This is a big question. Very important point which is discussed by many speakers and discussants is the interconnection between crisis and pandemic crisis. I want to stress, in our country, my colleagues and we wrote in the very beginning, in January and February, that we have in the beginning of world financial and economic crisis. and it was not interconnected with COVID-19. Pandemic became accelerator of the crisis, but in some aspects it is also became a fireman in the struggle against financial crisis, because we received so big problems that financial problems became not so important. This is important, and I think many speakers said similar things. I agree, and thank you for your contributions. I think it is very important to take into the account ideas of YALMAN Galip, I'm sorry if I'm wrong in pronunciation, our Turkish friend, who stressed that there is crisis in neoliberal capitalism, crisis of neoliberal and crisis of neoliberal capitalism. But I want to stress that there is not simply crisis of neoliberal model of capitalism. There is long, general, global, total crisis of capitalism as system, at the system. And the pandemic showed this, because the solution of such problems as COVID-19, as other global problems, which became extremely practically important for everybody. The solution of this problem is not capitalist system of relations. This is visible. Who made positive efforts to change the situation? Governments through social budgets, healthcare system where people in Russia were working as enthusiasts, as communists in many cases. They were promised to receive money, but money sometimes coming, sometimes not. They were working 12, 14 hours a day without any direct financial motivation. And the same in many countries. We had free, direct social regulation of economy. We received total, everywhere in all countries, requirement to overcome intellectual private property, at least in the sphere of medicine and technologies of the struggle against COVID-19. We received a lot of necessity of international solidarity, and not only communists and other good people are speaking about this. Even liberals were speaking about necessity of solidarity. But what we received in practice? We received enrichment of billionaires. I will not repeat figures which already were in our forum. We received growth, continuation of the growth of social differentiation, and terribly big difference between people who were starving in small apartments for 3-4 months of quarantine and people who were relaxing in islands in private palaces. So that's why we have very big intensification of contradictions and not simply inequality. It is global problem. About critique from Teresa, first of all, thank you very much for this critique. And partly I will agree, every transnational corporation has, let's say, national registration. But the key point is, it is interconnection, unity of supranational governments, states like United States. United States is not national state. This is global player together with US corporations. The same with European Union. It's not only union of some states. It is a transnational global player. China is trying to be also a global player, not simply Chinese national state who is thinking only about Chinese people. And this is, I think, very important aspect. And about cultural details. Of course, in India, there are a lot of Indian films. In Russia, we also have a lot of soap opera in Russian language produced by Russian directors and actors. But this is bad copies of Hollywood soap operas and movies. Bam, bam, blah, blah, man, wow, and that's it, yeah? Nothing new. The same, directly the same copies, except a few national, I don't know, entourage. This is a problem. This is globalization, not the problem of who is producing. I said this. It can be national repetition on national state with national corporations will do the same market capitalist economic, cultural, ideological things like global transnational players. It will be only symbolic difference. This is key idea of my presentation, one of the key ideas. With Dimitris, we already had agreements and disagreements about good and bad nationalism. When it is nationalism, a struggle for liberation against imperialism of the small nation, yes, this is partly positive, or maybe even mainly positive, but not 100% positive trend. And if it is only nationalistic struggle, it is a very dangerous trend, because as a result, we can receive, instead of imperialism, semi-feudal system. In some former Soviet states, former Soviet republics, parts of Soviet Union, we received very feudal relations with old style of life. In Soviet Union, people were living in new society. All this paranja and so on were impossible. Women as slave of men, it was impossible. Now it's the reality. This is the result of liberation from the domination of central state. Yeah, so, and this is a result of nationalism, very dangerous result. They have simply something like monarchies. That's why even with this, we must be very careful. And when we have nationalism of such countries as Russia, China, and so on, if leaders of such state as my state are not progressive, their struggle against imperialism can be also not very progressive. Yeah, of course, US government, NATO, and so on hate Russia because Russia became a subject of geopolitical struggle. And this is important to have multipolar world, but it's definitely not enough. And we will, if we tell only Russian nationalism is good nationalism, point, I will disagree. If we say we can use some elements of Russian nationalism in the struggle for international solidarity and another program together with China, India, and so on, and in this cooperation, we will forget about Russian nationalism, Chinese nationalism, Indian nationalism. We will think about our common program as key idea. This is another matter. I have a lot of other points, but I don't have time. I'm sorry. I'm too long. It's too long presentation. But you are responsible for this. Extremely interesting. I want to speak more and more. So thank you very much.
Thank you. But then maybe, Alexander, you could also just say a few words about the network that you are promoting. And actually, yes. Samir Amin wanted us to have to consolidate the connections. Maybe just a few words.
Yes. First of all, we have social movement alternatives, and this is a real network, partly intellectual. This is also educational project. A YouTube channel, journal. We have academic journals, and I invite everybody to write articles in English. We can publish in English for journal questions of political economy or problems in political economy. Maybe better to say in English. It's in Russia one of the very respectable academic journals, Marxist mainly, but not only. So everybody is welcome. Also, we have very deep connection with other social movements, including independent trade unions, struggle for rights of the women, Greens, and so on. And last year we had a big Russian social forum with big success. So mainly alternatives is like one of the motors who initiate everything. The title of the movement is Movement for Support of Social Initiatives. And we are very open and very glad to continue work of Samir Amin. And if anybody wants to make something like a round table in order to create think tank, which will continue the legacy of Samir Amin, we are very glad and we will participate in very active forms. I'm very strong supporter of such a project, or their project, better to say. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Because the whole idea of this forum and asking you to come together and to meet each other is that we know about the work that we are doing. And so there will be an opportunity for us to connect and then to produce more work. So now I'd like to...
my direct email, I don't know if you have, buzgalin@mail.ru. Very simple. Buzgalin, like my family name here. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and then mail.ru.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you could type in the chat so that everybody can have your mail. Yes, thank you. So now, Galip, can we have your response, please?
Well, thank you. There was a rather wide range of ideas put forward, and that's, I think, the richness, shows the richness of the forum. I'll just point out, pick a couple of points which I took note about. First, in regards to Alexander's point, I was saying that until the current crisis, which has been in a sense, accelerated as a result of the pandemic, there wasn't any direct challenge, if I could put it that way, to the neoliberal hegemony. There are different aspects of it, but generally speaking, that's why the way in which it has been experienced since 2008 financial crisis, it was characterized as crisis in neoliberal capitalism. And one basic reason for it, lack of a very strong political, ideological challenge, more broadly speaking, in terms of classes of labor. That's why it was considered as still maintaining itself, despite its problems in implementing its own specific crisis management. That's why I pondered whether or not the pandemic-initiated crisis that we're living through at the moment could be considered as a watershed for the future. We don't know the answer yet. There is a wide range of opinion stemming from within the Western world, as well as from within different positions in, broadly speaking, global South. But it's a very, as one of the speakers in the morning session put it, again in reference to Gramsci, it's an interregnum period. While the old is struggling, where the young, if you like, is yet to emerge. So that's why it is too early to say whether we could be considering a period in which neoliberal financialized capitalism leave its place to something else. And that's why I said there is a need to look at it from different perspectives. And that's why I gave reference not only to Gramsci, but also to Brodel, in terms of reminding ourselves its capacity of capitalism to adapt itself. And we see examples of it, or at least attempts in that direction. And interestingly, in regards to one of the points made, the need for inclusive, if you like, social orders, interestingly, it turns out to be one of the themes very recently put by the new managing director of the IMF, Georgina Kristeva, to quote that she thinks what is important now to achieve a more inclusive recovery, one that benefits all segments. Well, you may say, how? Then you see that it's nothing but new wine in old bottles, as they say. The important thing is, in her view, is to provide equitable access to opportunities for all. Well, this was a theme for the so-called poverty reduction strategies since the 90s. But it has still been presented in the light of the fact that there was increasing inequality in terms of this so-called 1%, 99% sort of dichotomy being reproduced, interestingly, in neoliberal circles as well. They had to acknowledge the widening gaps between different segments of the society and between different nation states, as in the sense. So they are talking in terms of a more inclusive recovery. Would it be plausible? No, but they are trying to put forward the idea that something which had been long forgotten, dropped out of the vocabulary of the neoliberal speakers, that there is need for solidarity. Is it achievable? Is it realistic? It's another thing. But they are trying to pick up these themes, which were part of the vocabulary of the critiques of neoliberalism, so as to establish a new basis for a capitalist order to overcome its crisis. To what extent it would be creating something new, yet to be seen. In other words, are we in a position to say that it is a crisis of neoliberal capitalism? I'm not sure yet. But as things are, there is that possibility. And the strengthening the realistic achievement of such a possibility, yes, we need to create new political subjects. That's essential. New forms of organization, and the need, if possible, of course, to the extent that is possible, because it has been tried before in the first decade of the 21st century in the form of world social forums, etc., new means of interconnection between different parts of the world. To what extent it will be a realistic option to overcome the increasing inequalities and create a basis for more stronger forms of resistance, yet to be seen. But take a note of it. IMF is speaking a language of inclusive recovery. And what should be the way to counterpose it is important. Second point, one of the discussants drew my attention to, which is something which I've been working about and writing about, but didn't include in my short presentation today, is this notion of populism. Whether or not it is plausible to condemn one and promote another. There's a wide literature about it, but what I wanted to draw your attention to is that the way in which the notion of populism has been taken on board in the during the last few years, especially prior to the pandemic, by well-known political theorists, if you like, who would not necessarily agree on every issue, but agree on the notion of characterizing the period, this rather protracted period of crisis since 2008, as the populist moment. Why do they do that? Because, for instance, in the words of Nancy Fraser, it implies an implosion or collapse of neoliberal hegemony. If so, that means, using the other terminology I shared with you, that we have been already into a period which could be characterized as crisis of neoliberalism rather than crisis in neoliberalism. But interestingly, the same populist moment will be characterized, another important political theorist, Chantal Mouffe, as the expression of a crisis of liberal democratic politics, talking mostly about the Western world or the global North. But if these are identical in terms of referring to this notion of populist moment, that means a crisis of neoliberal hegemony will be identified with the crisis of liberal democratic politics, which I would necessarily agree, because crisis of liberal democratic politics was a characteristic of neoliberalism from the early 1980s onwards. If you look at Thatcherite Britain to Turkey or different parts of the global South. So neoliberal hegemony was basically characterized by authoritarian forms of state, with or without parliamentary or presidential democratic regimes. So it is rather confusing to say that the current crisis until the pandemic was a period of implosion of neoliberal hegemony, at the same time a crisis of liberal democratic politics. To say that it was a crisis of liberal democratic politics, and in reference to Trump and various other right-wing movements or organizations in Western Europe especially, implies that until then, everything was fine. In other words, societies were being governed by democratic regimes. But democratic regime meant basically a procedural mechanism rather than a substantive democracy in which different segments of the society, especially the working people, could exercise their democratic rights and liberties. If you look at the world since 1980, most of the time it wasn't the case. So to talk in terms of crisis of liberal democratic moments as the populist moment of the only last few years is something which I wouldn't necessarily agree with. Finally, last but not least, in a sense, the importance of whether or not it is possible, I will definitely deliberately use this term, rather than talk about deglobalization or alternative forms of globalization, etc., whether or not it will be possible to put a new perspective in which the domination of international financial markets could be constrained. In other words, if you want to paraphrase, whether it or not it will be possible to definancialize rather than talk in terms of deglobalize. It is a global world and we are going to live in it. But whether or not it will be possible to bring mechanisms which will constrain this domination of the international financial markets and their actors, states as well as corporations, as well as, to use a jargon, non-financial organizations, which are very important actors playing in that field. So we have to really consider the point that we have reached and whether or not the pandemic provides an opportunity to rethink all these issues and provide a basis for the development of new political subjects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Galip. So now we will invite Melani. Melani.
Yes, thank you very much, Kinchi. I learned so much from all the participants. And I cannot comment on one or two because there are so many issues, but I've come up with more questions actually in my head, and it's no answer, but I think all this forum has given me a chance to reflect on several important issues. And I thank MUTO and others who brings up the issue of the social gap and social inequality, how the whole capitalist system and the paradigm has reproduced this social gaps and inequality, and how do we solve this? We cannot. Certainly, I agree that it's not really the end of globalization in the meaning that we are globally connected, because it will always continue. We live in it, and we are looking for global solidarity. So that kind of connection is still there. But how to deal with social gap and social inequality? How to make globalization with I forgot the quote. The one that has a face of humanity, it's culturally friendly, ecologically friendly. That is a question that is very hard to answer at this moment. But it is clear that the pandemic has opened up all the Pandora box of the structure. That it shows the ills in the internal structure of the nation, the connection between nations, and then etc. I thank Teresa for pointing out the vulnerability of Southeast Asian countries, Philippines and Indonesia, especially in this globalized world, because both countries actually are strongly dependent on work migration across the nation. And as we know, after this pandemic, all this has to stop, right? Whether it will be continued again in the new phase, while we know the vulnerability, then it is a challenge for this Southeast Asian country to rethink of a different kind of possibility for its citizens to get revenues in a different way. But this is again connected to social gaps. because we have the demand, the country that have demands, and we have countries that give supplies, a superpower and emerging countries. So these are all within the global structure. That's why we are sending the migrant workers abroad, because so these are connected, the internal problem of Southeast Asian country and the global structure. So how do we solve this problem? It's how do we create alternative economy? Especially also Southeast Asian countries are mostly dependent on tourism. That is rightly mentioned by Teresa, yes. And now everything stopped, the villages, all the places where there's tourism. What are they going to do? Are they going to wait until the global, is, and then we can return to normal? Or is there different kind of ways to have a different kind of tourism, a different kind of cultural, making a cultural center, places for cultural center, but not dependent on this foreign exchange economy? This is a question. I don't know who are going to do it. We have to do together between the state, lobby, all the society, communities, and Galip's word, how to definance, economy, to find alternative economy. Going back to the grassroots, the peasant economy, I think is another way too. Let's mention. I forgot who mentioned it. Going back to the peasant culture, the way they relate to nature, human relation, etc. To find to revive some of this wisdom, and to look for different kind of economies that are available from the communities. And another thing that these are still questions that we need to think about. But the last point is about the position of the leftist intellectuals. I think Ranwei mentioned it and others mentioned it. There is a crisis too for the intellectuals after the 60s, etc. We have gone into environmental activism, feminist activism, but all are fragmented. All have not been able to come together. It's more individual groups working together. They are not connected to the and I think one of you mentioned, Aiguo mentioned, class issue or something more grounded, like a community or something. There are more individual group competing with one another in terms of finding solution. Now, and another thing that we have not talked about is how the universities, intellectuals have been actually colonized by this capitalist market, the neoliberal economy. We have been really subjugated ourselves into this, following the ranking system, the Scopus, whatever, and competition. And the university have not been able to provide alternative ways. And therefore, I thank Kinchi and all your group that you find an alternative, for example, to set up global universities, although this is still, still to be worked out, but it is a way to connect again, to have this non-monetary kind of education. That is, again, I thank you also all for the initiative that you all each have. I will visit all the sites and forum to connect with this educational centers that opens up for a dialogue. It is still a problem for grassroots activists to connect to this forum because of the language problem, right? They cannot, peasant activists, kampong activists, they still have not managed the language level in order to, for example, discuss this issue in the same way. But there must be different modules, different modalities to engage with these different communities. And I'm sure that something like the Global University and all the other forums can open up the different modalities to communicate and really give access to education and to dialogue with different kinds of vulnerable groups. So in the end, we really hope that one day in the future, whether it's a changes, adaptation of the global system to adapt to demands, or we have a new kind of a paradigm, that everybody will have the universal basic rights given to them. That is the rights for education, rights for health, and rights for having enough job. And we are on the way to go there with all our initiatives. Thank you very much, Kinchi, for your intervention and your forum. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Melanie. So now, MUTO, please.
I thank all the speakers because I learned new things and new analysis very much from them. And I particularly like the approach of Melani. I think that's Melani's way of basing herself on communities and new aspects of people's action, which are informed by the new development of the situation. Well, I think what I'm thinking about and what I'm saying is a little bit, how can I say, aloof from the actual struggle, actual situation, and actual concerns, particularly economic situation and neoliberalism, etc. But still, I think that we need a new type of analysis, introducing maybe 3 dimensions. One, long-term. Second, of course, the mid-term. And third, of course, action, immediate action dimension. If there's a certain historical sort of structure which more or less is stable and sustainable in the strict sense of the word, because sustainable is not merely ecologically sustainable, but can hold on in the form it is in. Then we need analysis of that structure, though that were given, that were, if not permanent, more or less enduring. But my hunch is that we're in a very, very particular time of passage of time. You can say history, but it's more than history. It's not human history. For instance, the Siberian temperature. We see in TV that people are swimming, where there was frozen soil. What will happen? What is happening? I think much is said about it. Much is said about it, but what is said is not yet properly mediated to the immediate existing realities. And so, of course, I am for global demonstration against global warming, Paris Agreement, etc. Yes, these are very important. But even if Paris Accord is implemented, I don't think it can really work unless the basic of the relationship between human society and nature is changed on the basis of some entirely new idea of human society. And I think it's time to really not only think, but also to critically view what we are doing, what we have been doing, the meaning of the 20th century, meaning of 500 years ago. Some years ago we had what's the title? 500 years. Yes, we had a campaign in Nicaragua that was the headquarters, and in PP21 we actually worked together with them. So those things were said that, and movement-wise, some standard was set, but that should be, how can I say, mediated with the action and with the policy. So it's not just a lobbying, not just a sort of public demonstration, but something more than that. And I wonder whether what I'm saying is totally irrelevant, or it is sort of a dreamer's dream. I think that dimension is very, very important for us to begin with, and we can have a sort of a network of people who really take it, who really think about it, and relate it to the actual thing which is happening. Because I'm impressed by Melani's input, because Corona is now taken in a different context in Kampong. That's what she said, no? So that involves different relationship between Kampong and big cities. This is maybe a small example, but such small things are happening everywhere under the impetus of this global warming and pandemic and so on. So these things should be picked up and studied from a different angle, how things are being prepared for the future in the existing realities among the people. And I think the notion of People's Alliance, I think, should be revived. In this Corona process, at least scientists, medical doctors, and those working in that field are totally sort of working beyond national barriers, I was told. The papers and studies are quickly exchanged. And people really work together in the spirit of solidarity. And the general thrust is nationalism and the cutting up. And even in one country, you cut up big city from countryside, etc. But there are other moves, which is very, I think, important. in terms of the address to the long-term issue. So some sort of intellectual crystallization process is necessary, so that we really can find real sort of comrades across borders in addressing that big problem, which is already defined, but not really sort of attacked. That's how I feel. And so I wish to hear friends say something or react to that big issue. So that's my reaction.
Well, thank you very much, MUTO. Well, the whole idea of this panel that we are having is for old friends to meet again after maybe losing contact for 5 or 10 years, but then also for us to come to know, well, make new friends. And so I would call on you to send us papers if you haven't done so, because we are putting your papers on the reader section of the Seventh Sub Forum. So if you go onto the Global University website, you see the Seventh Sub Forum, and there you go to the reader, and under each session you find the writings of the panelists. So that is one way in which we facilitate the discussions. Actually, I've also started this panel group, the pre-forum panel group, but I think maybe now that you have met each other, the post-forum discussions could continue in that email group. And that group includes both the speakers from this, from the first session and this second session. And then another thing is, well, in 2 hours, we are going to have the third session for today, according to Hong Kong time. So the third session will be Hong Kong time 8:30, Japan time 9:30. And so we are going to have Michael Hudson and Wen Tie-jun debate on the question of China and the USA in the new Cold War. Whether we think this is new Cold War or it's only the post-Cold War or it's a warming up war. So we will be discussing that. And we will be also having Beverly Silver, Remy Herrera, Paulo Nakatani, Akbar Abbas, and also Radhika Desai as discussants. But the discussions had already started. So if you go to the reader, you will find that we already have 2 rounds of dialogue. So you could just, if you still have time, so you could take a look and then be prepared for tonight's discussion. So once again, thank you very much to all the panelists, and thank you also to the interpreters. You're doing very great job. And so we will see you again in 2 hours. And this forum continues because the main forum is, we still have 2 more days of the main forum. And then after this, we still have a lot of workshops and focus discussions on Venezuela, on Mexico, on the Mekong region. And we will end the whole forum with a lecture by Jean-Pedro Stadil, looking at the global rural movements. He will be delivering that in Spanish, and we will have the translations into English and Chinese. So please keep in touch, and I hope we are fostering new friendships besides the renewing old ones. Thank you again, and see you in 2 hours. Bye.